Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Finding Atlantis from Synapsis Games. Finding Atlantis is a 1 to 4 player deduction and hidden movement game, although I'd argue more deduction than hidden movement, but there is a little bit of both going on. The general idea of the game, and I will remove the player screen, this is helpful when you actually have multiple people at the table, but right now it's just you and I, so we don't need this, but otherwise it helps protect from prying eyes. In the game, the general idea is you are trying to find Atlantis. Now, Atlantis is going to be somewhere on this grid. You can play a short box game or a larger box game. There's also a few game modes and variants, which we won't heavily get into, but you're trying to find Atlantis. Now, there's certain rules at play. All those rules are listed on your little riddle card. The riddle card basically says that Atlantis is a grouping of 4 tiles. So let me go ahead and show it to you and zoom in a drop over here. So basically, we have Atlantis over here. You can see a grouping of 1, 2, 3, 4. Atlantis is always going to be a grouping of 4 spots that are connected orthogonally or diagonally to each other. Each of those is going to be on a seamount. So you can see over here, there's little mountainous areas. Each spot of Atlantis is going to be not just on a seamount, but on a spot of a seamount that is surrounded orthogonally by other seamounts. You can see a big part of the map over there is seamounts, with a few spaces of deep water, which is basically just empty spots entirely. There's also going to be artifacts. Artifacts are going to be also similar rules to Atlantis, same exact general concept, and both artifacts and Atlantis are referred to as traces in the game. So if you see a trace, you know that it's either Atlantis or an artifact. That's basically the rules you need to know. So what you're going to be doing next there is you're going to be playing cards on your turn. You see, you're going to start the game, you're going to be given a spot for your sub goes on the board, wherever it is, and then from there you're going to be playing cards on your turn. Now this is an app-driven game. There's going to be an app that scans the cards. I'm not going to bother showing you that for this, but basically you're going to run the app, you're going to choose the game type, choose the map size, all those various things, and then you're going to go ahead and be given your assigned position secretly, and you're going to start scanning cards. So what's going to happen is if I want to go ahead, for example, let's pretend I go ahead, I'm over here, I know I'm over there, I'm going to go ahead and play this card in the app, long silent running. I'm going to secretly move 1 space in 1 direction. So everyone knows I've played this card, but they don't know which direction I've moved. So they all get to see the card I played, but they don't get to see that I chose to move this way. But that means, and the importance of that is now I'm going to go ahead and reveal my sonar over here, which is going to check the 8 spaces surrounding me for seamounts and deep oceans. And maybe the app says, hey, you know, this spot has a mountain, 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 and that's it. Those 3 over here, those 5 spots over there have mountains. Now, players will be able to know some degree of information, but they don't know exactly where I am, but they can start piecing together some degrees of logical assumptions based on what they know if they're kind of trying to track me as much as possible. But your turn basically consists of playing a card. That card will often be used to move, and there's also, by the way, most cards, even this card, for example, can be flipped to go ahead and move. So you can always discard any card to be able to move just on the board. The difference is if you don't use an official movement card, then players see which direction you moved, which means if they know where you started, they know where you are. So it's not the worst to do that, but it's often better to do that after you've already played some sort of secret movement card. Now you're going to keep doing this playing cards. Cards will give you different degrees of information. They'll allow you to explore different areas. This is specifically, I think Explore is the right card over here. So Explore specifically lets you find out exactly what's underneath you, which means if you find Atlantis, you actually have a choice to try to pinpoint the entire Atlantis area to see if you won the game. If it's an artifact, you get to draw an artifact card, which are these ability cards you'll gather from this deck over here. And so you're trying to use the various logical puzzles to figure out what's what. I can go ahead and play Jelly Rod over here and pick an orientation and say, hey, I want to know whether there's traces on either side of my submarine. And maybe there is a trace. So I go ahead and just mark that corner. However, I don't know what it is, but maybe next turn I go ahead and play a card to just, you know, I discard this card to move up 1 or whatever, and then I go ahead and use the Explore card, I find out what's there, and I get an artifact and I pull that into my board. But you're basically just trying to move around the grid. You're trying to go ahead and figure out where the various seamounts are, to that end where the various traces are, and then where Atlantis are, using artifacts along the way to help you out by using their abilities. And then depending which mode you're playing as, you don't have to play as this, you can also start dropping mines. Mines are going to be one of the more, not necessarily advanced game modes, but alternate game modes where you can start dropping mines around the board, where if other players run into them, they're going to have to either discard cards or give you an artifact if they have one. So they can get in the way and obstruct other players, and again, they'll know you've dropped a mine, but they don't necessarily know where you dropped a mine. And that's basically the game. You also have a unique player role. So for example, over here I have the Navy, but there's a whole host of player roles over here. They all give you a different way to give something else. It's going to be an action for your turn. So for example, in the case of the Navy again, similar to the Jelly Rod, lets you pick 2 sides, and you can go ahead and choose where you can see the distance to each trace on either side of you. So it's a stronger Jelly Rod, which gives you a lot of information, but all the rules are all powerful in what they do and how they operate, giving you some degree of extra something that you can do or find out on your turn. And that's basically it. You're wandering around the board, you're deducing where the seamounts are, you're deducing where the traces are. Eventually you're going to try to make a claim and figure out if you found Atlantis, and if you did so, you win the game. That's it. That's all you need to know. There's hidden movement, there's deduction, and that's it. Which brings us to the ease of play. Brings us to the review, starting off with ease of play. Ease of play in this one is a little bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, the rules are fairly short, very easy to, well, as far as shortness of it, very easy to read. I did find them a little more confusing than I'd like, given how short they were. I did not find everything in the rulebook intuitive, and also the rulebook at one point says, well, go ahead and just learn from the app while playing, but the app doesn't really teach you the thing, so you're kind of in this weird spot where you are semi-learning through the app, but not actually learning. You're just kind of doing stuff, and then occasionally it feeds you information in a way that actually isn't helpful enough to be considered learning. So my process for learning this game was reading the rulebook until it said use the app, using the app, not getting information, going back to the rulebook, figuring all that out, and again, not the easiest, it was not the worst, but not the easiest, and then going back to the app and occasionally being spoon-fed pieces of information that sometimes were relevant only after something happened. So for instance, at the very beginning, they let you drop off and sit down in the middle of the board somewhere, and then you can move, and you can move off the edge. But the game doesn't really track that for you, just move off the edge. And then later it tells you, hey, if you move off the edge, we're not going to tell you that so as not to mess up the other players and find out where you are. But that's information given after the fact. I'm not going to get too much into it. I will say, not the hardest game to learn, but it was made harder than it needed to be, both between the rules and the app. As far as the review itself, as far as what I like, don't like, and conceal as not liking, starting off with what I like, which is this is a deduction game. I like deduction in general. I like the process of piecing together pieces of information to figure things out. I also like the various roles in the game. There's a degree of replayability just in the roles themselves because they all feel very powerful. These roles give you strong abilities, and it's fun to try different ones and combinations. That's kind of where what I like taps out. It's not that this is a bad game. There are elements I'm going to complain about shortly, but there's not a lot that really stands out on the positive side. I think the main positives is this is a deduction game where you're trying to figure out a puzzle. There's various cards and economy of actions as you go along the way, but nothing strongly stands out. So it's not that it's that bad, it's just that the things it does well are okay, and I think the thing that I liked the most were the various roles and how powerful those felt. Past that, it's a deduction game. As far as what I don't like, on the other hand, there are more things to complain about there. I'll say that the deduction itself was not too impressive. There are so many deduction games out nowadays. They all have multiple interweaving elements as far as how things operate. This felt very, very basic. It felt like intro to deduction. It felt, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, just it doesn't feel like it's marketed as such. It really felt like there were like 3 rules, and that's it. Giving you very little, like, ways to extrapolate extra interesting pieces of information or be able to read from this to that. You're kind of just finding seamounts and then finding traces, and then that's really it. You know, if you find a trace on a seamount, well, if you find a seamount that's next to an empty space, you know there's not a trace in that. That's kind of the only element of actual deduction past literally being told information in the game. So I felt the deduction puzzle at play was not too impressive. I felt the app slowed down the game. In the general in the game experience, scanning the cars just felt like a slow way to play the game that just obfuscated things. Things didn't always scan right away either, but it was fine as far as the app went. It just slowed down the game experience. The rules in the app, as I mentioned already, weren't the best. The tracking of the other players felt a little weird and out of place. In general, in tracking games, if you're playing like a hidden roll game or something like Captain Sonar, where you really have this whole like same kind of idea, if you're playing games like that, you're often only tracking one other element, which makes it a lot easier, because even when you're dealing with states of the unknown, even if I'm like, okay, you move 2, but I don't know which direction you move to, I can still chart it out because there's one other player. If you're playing this as a 3 or 4 player game and you have to track the possible maybes of multiple other players, you may as well just give up. And granted, I'm sure there are people who are like, no, I've got this and I've handled it. Fine, I'm going to give up. I'm not going to try to track the maybes of multiple players. Tracking the maybe of one player is already enough. Tracking the maybes of multiple players is just not worth the cost of whatever. And when you eventually surface, I didn't cover this, but when you eventually get your cards back by surfacing, but surfacing shows everyone where you are. So you're revealed again, which might mean that if you did something right away, right after that, we might be able to read into your information or what you're trying to do or figure out. But overall, the tracking just didn't feel, the hidden roll element didn't feel like an integral part of the game, so much as a very complicated part of the game, especially at higher player counts, with very little payoff for that complication to actually follow and go through on. So a bunch of things that kind of got in the way of me enjoying this experience. As far as what I can see others not liking, and this is an interesting one, the game says it's a solo game. It's a 1 to 4 player game, but from what I can see in the rules and in the app, and it's possible I'm missing something. It is absolutely possible I'm missing something. In the rules and in the app, the solo mode, from what I can see, is just you playing action cards until you find Atlantis. There's no race. There's no reward. There's no aspect of, if you do it in 7 rounds, it's a good score, or there's no AI opponent. And maybe there is. Maybe there's a setting in the app, I didn't see it, but it wasn't in the rulebook, and it wasn't clear in the app. So if there's something I missed there, I'll attach a pinned comment if someone says something I don't know, but I didn't see it. And so that's a weird thing to put on your box that it's a solo game, if the solo game isn't a game so much as a just keep doing stuff until you find things, I guess. I don't feel that's an ideal solo experience, so I disagree with the 1 on the box, at least as of now. As far as final thoughts on this game, I don't even think this is a bad game. I don't. I think it's an unimpressive game. I think that in the world of great games, this was an okay experience that did nothing really strong to stand out in any way. Again, I like these abilities. These abilities are very fun. Going through them, I haven't played with all of them yet, but even the ones I haven't played with, I still kind of want to use because they're fun. They're cool. They're powerful. But that's kind of the only thing that really stood out. The rest of it was a game system that's been done before many times, and they are usually good or great, and this one was just passably okay. For me, this is a 2.5 out of 5. There just wasn't a lot to be impressed by here. It still wasn't the worst game I've played, but it is one that I'm inclined to not play again because it's time I have to spend playing it, and very little elements of the game were rewarding enough to dive back in. So a 2.5 out of 5. As far as other game recommendations, in the deduction department, I'm going to recommend The Quest for Planet 9, or The Search for Planet 9, is that what it's called? The Quest for... I can't remember all the names. The Search for Planet X? No, The Quest for... My gosh, I'm mixing up the crew. The Search for Planet X. I think that's the name of the game. From Renegade Games, it's a deduction game involving searching for a planet. It has similar deductive elements to it, but I thought a lot more interesting and a lot more rewarding as far as deduction goes. And if you are looking for that hidden role kind of element, a game that kind of does what it's doing over here is Captain Sonar. Captain Sonar is a hard game to table. You really want 8 people, 2 teams of 4, going head-to-head, operating subs, taking pot shots at each other, trying to move around the board as hidden as possible. But it really encapsulated all the hidden elements this game is doing, but in a way and structure that's actually really rewarding and worth the payoff of all that tracking. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.